Finding yourself lost in finding ways to be found, getting into your mind, lost in. Hey, everybody, and welcome to Lost in the Groove. Today, we have a traveler. We have Gary here with us today to share his experience, career, and what it's like to be around this globe that we call Earth. So, without further ado, Gary, welcome to Lost in the Groove.
Thank you for having me.
Of course, my pleasure. Well, tell me a little bit about yourself. So, I know you're a traveler and you've been around a lot of places. What do you do exactly?
What do I do now? Now
Yeah.
I'm a podcaster. I have a daily podcast. It's an educational show. It's about 10 minutes a day, and it has a real big audience. I do about 30 to 40,000 people a day listen. And but before that, in 2007, I sold my home, and I thought I would travel around the world for a year, and then it just kind of never ended. And I basically was on the road until the pandemic hit.
Oh, wow. Crazy. So you just decided one morning that like you're going to just sell your house, you're just going to pick yourself up and just travel for a year.
Yeah, that was in. So I had an internet company that I started in the 90s. I sold it. I went back to school for a few years. Wasn't really satisfied doing that. And I didn't know what to do. And then I just kind of hatched this idea of traveling. I had no kids. I had no wife. There was nothing preventing me from doing anything. So I had that idea in 2005. And then it wasn't until March of 2007 that I had everything wrapped up. I had the house sold, and I was able to get on the road.
When you make a big decision like that, it there takes a stepping stone, there takes a pillar of where you have to create, your outcome and know where you're going. Because the thing is that like when you're making a decision of traveling for an entire year, did you just come with the idea of like, okay, I'm just going to go and do all these places, I don't know what I'm doing? Or did you actually have a plan going into this?
There was no plan. All decisions, I think, are ultimately made in an instant. We may take time to convince ourselves and to come up with an argument for it, but we really come up with most decisions in an instant. We decide we're going to do something. I just knew I wanted to travel, and the general plan was to go west. So I worked my way I lived in Minneapolis at the time. So I drove down to Dallas in a rental car. From Dallas, I took the train to Los Angeles. From there, I flew to Hawaii, learned how to scuba dive, went to Tahiti, Easter Island, and spent the next 6 months crossing the Pacific Ocean.
I like that attitude, and I do try to have that mentality as well. As when you say go with the universe or go with the flow, it's not being dim-witted or saying that I'm naive. No, it's being realistic of that a lot of decisions that we make, actually most decisions that we make are in a split second because things can change. Literally can change in a matter of seconds. Flights can get delayed.
Oh,
People move around. You decide to go here, but it makes more sense for you to go somewhere else. All of these things can happen, and you never know.
no, I always tell people that want to travel that before you go on a trip, you got nothing else to do. So you sit and you plot and you plan and you figure out all the stuff you want to do. But as soon as you hit the road, it's all going to fall apart. And your ability to adapt is going to be far more important than your ability to plan. It's kind of like going to war. You can have this great plan, but then things don't go according to plan, and then you got to figure out what to do. So you're absolutely right. I've had, I remember I was in Samoa once. I was going to get a flight to Tonga, and at the time they were on different sides of the international date line, and I read the date wrong, and
God.
I showed up at the airport right when the flight was taking off. Like I saw the plane leaving because I was showing up at when I thought the flight was leaving when it was landing.
Oh, okay.
So I was like, oh crap. And so then I had to talk to Air New Zealand. I said, "Oh, look, I did this. Can I change my ticket to next week when the next flight was going to be?" So then I had a week on my hands. I'm like, "All right, what am I going to do?" So I took a flight to American Samoa and just hung out there for a week. And so I had things like that happen all the time. I once was going to fly from London to New York, and and so I got a flight on TAP Portugal that was going to fly to New York. I'm like, oh man, I'm gonna get there early. I'm gonna get a hotel next to the airport. So I got a place near Heathrow. Got there in the morning, plenty of time. Couldn't see my flight listed anywhere. I'm like, excuse me, where's this flight? What gate is it from? Turns out I went to the wrong airport,
Oh
and
god. I've
there
had
was
that happen. Yeah.
there was
It's not
no.
fun.
I was so focused on London and New York, and I just sort of assumed it was Heathrow. I didn't realize it was Gatwick, and there was no way for me to get from Heathrow to Gatwick in enough time.
No.
And I ended up having to buy another ticket, which was far too much money buying it at the airport. So I've done dumb things like that. I've had other things that are just out of your control. Weather, you know, stuff happens. Strikes in Europe. I've had that happen. And one of the things that traveling really teaches you is to just kind of go with the flow. One of the things that I just can't stand is I remember I was in Bali, and I was at an internet cafe, which you don't usually see too much anymore at the time. This is back 2007, 2008.
It depends where you are. Like, for example, I lived in Israel, and internet cafes are very common there because of Wi-Fi. So depends where you are, but you are correct. Like, there are places where that doesn't really exist anymore.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of people have cell phones now, and it's just
Yeah.
more ubiquitous. But anyways,
Right.
so I'm there, and this woman just starts putting up a stink about, oh, you gave me the wrong change, and blah blah blah. And I eventually realized how much money she was talking about, and it was 10 cents. And
Well,
it's 10 cents. Just let it go. There are times you're going to go to a restaurant, there's going to be some miscommunication, and you ordered the beef and you got chicken. All things being equal, unless there's a huge difference in what you ordered, go with the chicken. It's just easier. And that's just kind of the attitude you develop when you travel.
yeah. I mean, I can relate so well. I had about 2 years ago. I have a close friend of mine. She's actually the host of the other segment for Lost in the Groove, American Groove. She lives in California. So about 2 years ago, it was kind of after the pandemic. You can get flights at the time from like New York to LA for like $120. So I flew out there with no gate plan, no money. And she's like, we have Groupon. Why don't we just use Groupon and just use that to figure out the places that we were going? It was amazing. I had no idea what we were doing. We just had this one thing to use, and we were able to have a really good time. And sometimes I feel that you don't need to have a crazy, excessive, insane plan when you go travel. Just get on the plane, go to the place, you'll figure it out when you're there.
Yeah, a lot of times if you go and stay at a hostel, for example, there'll
Mm-hmm.
be common areas, and you'll be able to meet people and talk to them.
Oh,
And
yes.
usually there are people that have been there for a while, and they're going in the opposite direction you are. So they've just recently been wherever you were thinking of going. So they'll have the most up to date information about what the hours are, what the prices are, things you need to know, or just what's really cool to go see that maybe you didn't know about. And there's been a lot of times where I've just, improvised stuff on the fly, or I've stayed in the place longer than I was anticipating just because I wanted to. I arrived in Saigon in Vietnam on a bus from Cambodia. I got off. I had no place to stay. And there's a woman there with a book. She goes, "Sir, do you need a place to stay?" I'm like, "Yes, I do." She showed me pictures of her guest house. I was like, "Do you have Wi-Fi?" She goes, "Yes." Sold. I stayed there a month, and they loved me because I was quiet. I didn't put up a fuss, and they had free breakfast that I never ate. So
That's wonderful.
I didn't plan it. They just, and eventually I was like, "Oh boy, I need to renew my visa." They're like, "Oh, we'll take care of it." And there's like, "Well, it'll take 2 weeks, or if you give us $20, we can get it done overnight." It's like the special bribe they paid who's ever doing it. And so I got the overnight one. But yeah, you just there are things like a visa where you obviously can't overstay when you're in a place. But beyond that, you within those parameters, there's a lot you can do, and that's usually what I did. I just kind of made it
Yeah.
up as I went along.
Have you ever been to the Philippines?
Yeah, a couple
You
times.
have. I the thing is, I've been around Filipino culture for quite some time. Like when I was in LA, when I lived in Israel, especially like out here. I'm very curious. What is it like being in the Philippines, surrounded by that? Like, what was your experience being there?
Very warm and friendly people for the most
Yeah,
part.
yeah.
Manila isn't my favorite city, but once you get out of Manila, and that's true for a lot of major cities like that, that once you get out of the big city, things get a lot better. I've only been to Luzon. Well, that's not true. I've been to Luzon and Palawan, but yeah, there's a lot of Filipinos. You meet Filipinos
They're wonderful.
everywhere around the world.
They're wonderful people, though. I love their culture. I love their mentality. And there's something about that part of Asia, like Vietnam, the Philippines. I don't know what it is. These people, their culture, their mentality. I'm just so fascinated by it, and like you being there and being able to experience it, that's just absolutely incredible.
Well, Southeast Asia is, a very affordable place to travel, which is why a lot
Yeah.
of people go there.
Yeah, it is.
And there's a lot of places you can go that don't get a lot of tourists. I went up to the rice terraces of Banawe, and there just weren't many people there, even though it's like one of the biggest things to see in the Philippines, because it takes an effort. You're going to be on a bus or a car for several hours in a very winding road through the mountains to get there, but it's really an amazing experience. I remember I was in Vietnam once in a village called Mune on the coast, and there was this little shack near the beach that had seafood. I remember getting a grilled fish, a squid, like 2 bottles of beer. The whole thing cost me like $5, and it was amazing. One of
That's
the best meals
awesome.
I had.
Yeah. See, that's also great because I love the idea of being able to travel, but people have this like idea when you have to travel, it's like it's super expensive. Personally, I have found being able ways of traveling on $100, $200, even less. I've traveled literally to Los Angeles with $50 the whole entire trip spending. So I'm just giving that as an example, but I'm saying like that is a great example of where you can travel to really great places, experience a lot of great things. Yes, there's going to be that effort, but it's not going to cost you so much by the time you get home and you have to go back to your regular job or whatever you're doing. You're going to feel drained because your finances have been diminished
When
immensely.
most people travel, they're going on some sort of trip where someone's taking care of everything for you. You're going to an all-inclusive resort, you're going on a cruise, you're going to a luxury hotel, and yeah, you're going to pay a lot of money for that. And you're still paying for everything back home. Like when you go on
Yeah,
vacation, it's not like, oh, well, you don't tell the bank, well, I'm going to be gone for 2 weeks, so I'm not going to pay mortgage because I'm not using the house. That's not how it works.
right.
So with what I was doing, I had no expenses. I didn't have a rent or a mortgage. I didn't have utilities. I didn't have insurance. I wasn't paying for gas. I didn't have all those things that everyone pays for that just go with living, everyday life. And when you're doing that, then travel becomes really cheap because if you stay at accommodations like a guest house or a hostel, you're not paying very much money. Food can be very cheap, especially if you're willing to cook your own or, you know, something where you got a kitchen that you can work with.
Yeah,
So there's a lot of options. And the biggest thing that determines how much you spend really is where you go. Like if you're going to Switzerland,
expensive.
there's just no way around it. It's just
Germany
expensive.
also is expensive. Like, you go to England. I went to the UK. It's expensive. There's a lot of places that are great to go. They could be somewhat affordable, but they're expensive in other ways. They really are.
And some places are expensive to get to. So, for example, in the Pacific, a lot of people think, oh, Fiji, and they think of these overwater bungalows that cost $1,000 a night. No, I've been able to stay at a place that was run by a local village for $50 a night,
Oh, nice.
and and it was an all inclusive.
Oh,
So that
wow.
included all your food, and you are right next to the beach. Like your bed, you could jump out and within 5 to 10 seconds be on the beach, that close.
Wow. That's
And
amazing.
very few people there. And I tell people about it all the time because one of the neat things about Fiji is that their busy season is our summer because most of their tourists comes from Australia and New Zealand. So right now we're recording this in July. This is their busy
Right.
season. Their low season is our winter. So if you're willing to make the trip and they have direct flights from LA, you arrive there in the morning, you can get on a boat that goes up the Yasawa Islands. They have 30 little resorts that you can stop at. They will radio ahead and you can just get off the boat at any one, stay there 1, 2, 3 nights, whatever you want. They'll radio the boat whenever you want to leave. And you can just kind of like go island hopping.
Oh, wow. That's amazing. And I mean, you said it was $50 just for a little bungalow by the beach.
I
How
don't know
much?
what the prices are now. It was a while
Oh,
since I've been there, but
okay.
it's still going to be cheap because this is not, these are not luxury accommodations. But then again, who cares? I mean, this is literally where they shot Blue Lagoon. So this is, white. I've had a white sand beach the size of a city block to myself where I couldn't see another human. So this is not like going to Cancun where it's just a beach with, thousands of people. I had this all to myself. And because most of these resorts are run by local villages, all the money stays in the village. And it's allowed them to improve their quality of life. I went there first time in 2007. I went back several years later, and I met one of the same guys that I met the first time I was there, and I had a discussion with him about it. And he was saying like, yeah, well, because of the resort, if a woman's pregnant, we now fly them into the mainland to give birth at a hospital rather than doing it in the village. If someone's sick or whatever, they can do that. Kids can get sent to a boarding school to get a proper education. Everything is just done better because all the money stays there rather than going to some big corporation that built a hotel and they're just hiring people at a low wage.
Right. Yeah, and it's really great because you like you said, these are small communities, they're islands. Kind of very similar to the Caribbean, where you have all of these little islands with there's a you want to say a lot of people, but it's a small number compared to a lot of major places. And one of their disadvantages is if they don't have revenue to pour back in to take care of themselves and continuing helping the community grow, like allowing businesses to grow, people be able to afford to fix their homes, things like that. Proper plumbing, for example, is another one, proper lighting and infrastructure in cities. But at the same time, still being able to be a place of paradise. It's just something that you can just go and really relax and really meditate and open up your mind and soul.
Yeah, and there are places like that in the Caribbean. Most people they're drawn to again the Sandals Resort or whatever because those are the places that advertise. So that's all they know about. And they're going to go to the larger islands because the larger islands have airports that accept large planes that fly in from Europe and the US. But some of the best islands are small ones where you can't fly to directly. You're going to have to take a flight to a big island and then a smaller flight. And most people don't want to take that extra step. So, one of the best islands in the Caribbean is the island of Dominica. And most people don't know about it. They confuse it with the Dominican Republic, which it's not. It's a extremely mountainous island. It's not really a beach island, but they have 365 rivers on the small island, fantastic waterfalls, hot springs, and hardly anybody goes there. It is the least visited country in the Western Hemisphere. And there's other tiny islands as well, like Saba and St. Eustatius, that are very close to St. Martin. You can easily get there within 10 minutes, but they're really tiny and nobody knows about them.
It's all about exploring, like you said earlier. When you talk with locals and you go to a hostel and you meet interesting people, you learn things along the way that you generally wouldn't if you didn't have those experiences.
Oh yeah, I have a bunch of experiences like that where I was in Oman in the Middle East, and I was in the town of Nizwa, which is about 100 kilometers or so from Muscat, the capital. And I was going to go back, and I was waiting at this stand for a taxi. 100 kilometers seems like a long way, but there are regular taxis that make this route. And this guy stopped, and he offered me a ride. He didn't speak English, and I didn't speak Arabic. And I thought, your spidey senses start tingling, but it was perfectly fine. He bought me dinner along the way, took me directly to my hotel. And, when I put my bags down inside and went outside to thank him, he had already gone. I was going to give him some money for gas or something. And he just did it to be generous. And there are experiences like that I've had all over the world.
Yeah. Well, it's also, again, tying back to culture. You mentioned in the Middle East. I happen to be Middle Eastern myself. My father's from Morocco. The thing about different cultures, and I think this is something that we forget as Americans, is we are a combination of different types of cultures coming together from other different nations and places throughout the world. And we live here in different communities all over the place. But I think that what gets very forgotten is that even though that we are different, there are things that we can learn from that. And I think someone like you, especially with your traveling, you really point that out so well.
I always like to say that, to use Morocco, for example, I could move to Morocco. I could learn Arabic. I could, you know, embed myself as deep into the culture as I could, but I would never be Moroccan, right?
Yes, this is true.
There's just always going to be a limit. But if you're from Morocco, you could come to the US and be an American.
Yeah.
And that's a huge difference. And you can just say, well, yeah, I'm a Moroccan American. It's like, all right, we got all kinds of that. And that's just how it works. And I don't think I think there's a lot of people outside the US that they have a feeling how they know how the US works
Hmm.
because they see it on movies and TV.
Yes.
But there's a lot of stereotypes that they make and a lot of things that they get wrong about it. And but it's because they're so familiar with it through media that, and if they have been here, it's like, oh yeah, I've been to the US, I was in New York. I'm like, yeah,
That's not the United
that's
States. Yeah.
I
No.
mean, it is,
Kind
but
of.
that's not representative of anything but New York. New York is a thing unto itself. You're not going to find any place else in the US like New York.
Well, here's the thing. I'm from New York, and I'm from upstate New York. I'm from the county right across the Hudson River. The thing is, when people say they come to New York City, there's New York City and then there's New York State. If you really want to experience what New York State is, go upstate. There's farms, apple country. I mean, that is what it is. But again, representation. It's what people see more. It's what people have access to more is becomes the norm. Like you said
Every
with major
everybody
cities.
everybody I know that came to the US visited maybe one of six cities. It was New York, Orlando, maybe Washington, LA, San Francisco, Las Vegas. Like that constitutes the majority of what people saw because that's what they see on TV. And I met so many people that said, oh, I want to go to Los Angeles and we're going to go see movie stars. I'm like, no, you're not. You are not going to see any movie stars. That's just not how it works.
Mm-mm.
And I really think if you want to see the country, you need to drive.
Yeah.
You need to get in a car and drive across the country. And if possible, don't do it on an interstate because that's really the only way you'll see it. To be fair, I would meet people as well who every so often would be like, oh yeah, I was in Huntsville, Alabama. It's like, really? What were you doing in Huntsville? And there's always a story behind it. It was for work or school or whatever. But they did get to go to some other part of the country that wasn't just a big city. And they usually had a much better idea of what the country was about.
This is funny you bring this up. I knew an Israeli hippie when I lived out there. He visited the US twice, and he went to visit Nashville, Tennessee. And the reason is he was a banjo player. and he wanted like the full experience of like blues, R&B, and soul. So that's why he went there, and he spent like 11 days, came to this country, and went there specifically. And I was like, just like you said, it kind of tingles me like, so you didn't go to like a major city that everybody goes to. Like, why did that? And in his case, was because of his playing. But it's interesting what people's interpretation of American culture is because they don't live here. You know, it's like on the other side.
Every so often, I would meet people that had a bit of a deeper understanding. I was in Iceland, and I went to this restaurant just because I was in search of a hamburger that was under $20, and this was the closest I could find.
Crazy.
And there were these Icelandic guys sitting at a table, and I was listening to them, and they were talking about the Green Bay Packers. And
I love
I'm
this.
I was born right outside of Green Bay. Like I own a share of the Green Bay Packers. I'm an NFL owner, and I kind of wanted to go over to him as like, oh, by the way, that's my team.
Green Bay? Eh? Ever heard of them?
But first, that they would be interested in American football, and second, of all the teams to pick the Green Bay Packers, I was just kind of impressed.
It's crazy though because I've heard this before. There is this like obsession of American football in Europe, like especially like in Norway, Iceland, the UK. Again, it's kind of like try to picture it. Try to imagine yourself walking into a pub in Manchester and hearing a bunch of blokes talking about, a game with the 79ers. You're like, what? What? You're English. What do you know about this? But like, it's just crazy how they like fall in love with American culture.
Yeah, I've heard that the NFL fan base in the UK is about 10% of the population, which is about, I would say, similar to maybe the percentage of the population in the US that is, deeply interested in professional soccer, like the English Premier League. But if the country's big enough, that's 8 million people who are potential fans who live in the UK. That's why actually the television rights for the English Premier League in the United States sold for more than Major League Soccer.
Damn, it's crazy. I'm always fascinated. I'm not a huge sports fan myself, but it's very interesting because sports has a way of bringing people into this group, into this crowd. And when you're dealing with American sports, you're having these people that are non-American. And there's something about this that fascinates them. Like you said, it's 10%. It, you know, when you look at it like it's 8 million people, but something is inspiring or them or something fascinates them about this. I like to, this is just me, I like to read into things. I'm curious as to why things spark people. What makes people curious? You know,
I don't know.
it's
I think
interesting.
being conversant in different sports, especially if you're an American, because our sports are different than the ones the rest of the world plays. So if you can be
Yeah.
somewhat conversant in whatever the teams are in a given country, maybe adopt one of them as your own, just cause. So like I've adopted Liverpool as my English Premier League team. I've adopted Bilbao as my La Liga team in Spain. I learned a lot about rugby and cricket traveling through those parts of the world where people like it. If you go to India, cricket is just huge. It's the number one sport by a wide, wide margin. If you go to New Zealand, the top three sports are rugby, rugby, and rugby. I actually had the pleasure of being in New Zealand in 2011 for the Rugby World Cup, and I got to watch New Zealand win in the final game live. And if they hadn't won, I was fearing people would be jumping out of windows there. But even in places like, Fiji and Samoa that I've talked about before, they have a rugby culture as well. And I remember I was in Samoa and they had just beaten, I think, a team from New Zealand at the Hong Kong Sevens, and they were giving the New Zealand tourists there the business about it and stuff. And so it's always helpful to at least have an awareness of it. I don't think
Right.
you need to be a super fan or anything, but if you just show, I'm an American who at least knows something about cricket, people will be kind of impressed.
Yeah, I it was really funny because when I went to the UK, I watched a cricket match on television, and I was just so in tuned that I had no realize that somebody was trying to talk to me for like the past 5 minutes. It's
Yeah,
just
it's well, especially if you don't know the game, it
no,
takes a while to figure out what's going on.
yeah, for
Rugby's
sure.
rugby is easy if you understand American football because American football was based on rugby. So the basic goals of the game are the same. You have a ball, you're trying to get it in the end zone, you have goalposts, you score points for doing that.
You don't have
The
any
way it's
gear though. They don't wear any protection. That's
no,
one of the,
but in some ways that's actually better.
okay,
All the padding and the helmets mean that you can hit someone at full speed, right? That they take risks that you would never do if you didn't have that. And there's even been proposals like, getting rid of helmets or something like that in the NFL. It would force people to play radically differently. That, this high speed thing where you just nail someone as fast and as hard as you can would go away. I don't know if they'll ever do it, but
prob-
they,
this
they, I'm
maybe
not, rugby has its own share of problems in terms of injuries,
right.
but I don't think they have as big a problem with concussions, which helmets were supposed to solve. And it didn't.
Well, it's just a different. I think it's just also a different approach to American football. Like when you watch rugby, it's more tactical because, like you said, one thing I've noticed personally, when I see American football is you have that running after, chasing, ramming into, kind of climbing on top. Whereas when you watch a rugby match, it's more tactical. Like you're figuring out where you're supposed to go, how you're supposed to receive it, where your place is. Um, I don't know.
It's a fluid
Yeah,
game like basketball, ice hockey, soccer. The game is constantly evolving. You have to make decisions based on the conditions on the field, where your teammates
right,
are, etc.
right.
American football is a strategic game because you're always starting from a set position and you have these elaborate plays with lines and you're going to block and there's deception that you can do and all this other stuff that you really don't see in any other sport. And I think a lot of people miss that part about it. And then games like baseball and cricket, which are really stochastic games where it's like, each event is a separate thing that can be recorded and documented. But yeah, sports are definitely huge. Something you should know about. And it, like I said, I mentioned bringing up sports is an easy way to connect with people. If you just know something about where they're from. So one of the things you mentioned Filipinos, and like I said, I met Filipinos all over the world. And if I meet someone and let's like she has a name tag and it says, Mary Castro and she's Asian, I know she's from the Philippines. If you have a Spanish sounding name and you're Asian, you're probably from the Philippines. And they have a definite accent as well. They say, okay,
Yeah.
that's $3, sir. And I was like, oh, where in the Philippines are you from? I don't ask them if they're Filipino. I just say, where in the Philippines are you from? Go, well, sir, how you know I'm from Philippines? And then I just say, oh yeah, it's like, oh, I'm from Quezon City. It's like, oh yeah, just outside Manila. I've been there. Like, really? And then, if you have any just knowledge of where they're from, even if you acknowledge it and show the basic understanding of it, it's just a huge way to get people to open up to you and to meet them.
It's also remembering this is how civilization has formed. Go back to times of Mesopotamia. It's a mixture of cultures conversing and coming together and learning from one another and creating societies from it. The way that we have grown as people is being able to learn from one another, being able to, like you said, just starting with the basics, asking somebody, having that curiosity to learn from the other person. Like, what is what is it like for you? You
Oh,
know?
I am a big believer that all of human history, if you wanted to boil it down to one thing, all of human history can be thought of as the history of the movement of people, goods, and ideas.
Very
That's really
powerful.
what it all is. Sometimes those movements of people are not good. It could be the Mongol horde coming and sacking a city, or a
Oof.
Roman legion, marching into Gaul. But trade and ideas flowing from one place to the other, the development of systems of thought, whether it's an alphabet or whatever, techniques for doing things, shipbuilding. These are all things that, like I said, you can look at history through that lens, and it's still a part of it today. And I think when you're traveling, you're kind of taking part in that legacy.
You are, and you're also walking in the same footsteps sometimes as your ancestors. I went to Italy. I was in Rome, and I remember I was in the Colosseum. And when you're in a place like that, keep in mind, like, this is over 2,000 years old. You're standing in a place that is riddled with history all over its walls, on the floor that you're standing on. And to just take a moment and realize what it is to be there, to experience that, to be in that moment.
One other thing about traveling, a lot of people think of traveling as your experience as a traveler experiencing other cultures. But there's a flip side to that as well.
Right, exactly.
You are introducing your culture to the people you meet.
Yeah.
I was in the Solomon Islands. Doesn't get a
Ooh.
lot of visitors.
Hmm.
And this guy was telling me about this thing that they would occasionally do when they had really strong winds. There's this type of spider there that creates a very thick web, like in the crotch of a tree. And what they would do is they would cut that out and they would attach it to a very large leaf, like a banana leaf or something, and blow it across the water and see if they could get a fish to jump into it and get caught in the web. And I was like, wow, that's really cool. And then I
Okay.
told him about how my people fish. In the winter, it freezes, and you walk out on the water
Hmm.
and you drill a hole, and then you put a line down there and you catch a fish. And this guy just looked at me dumbfounded. He's like, truly, your people walk on the water. And he had never experienced snow. He had never experienced ice, outside of, getting it in a drink or something. And it probably never dawned on him that an entire body of water could freeze over, that you could walk out on it, drill a hole, and fish.
Yeah.
But he introduced me to what he did, and I introduced him to what I did. And Solomon Islands are a place where a lot of those people are not going to be traveling around the world. So I was able to introduce him to something that maybe he never would have thought of before. So
Uh, this reminds me. I have a cousin of mine. He came here to the states, and it was I would say about like 6 inches of snow. It was pretty heavy. It was bad. And we were sitting in their car and we were just laughing. And he says to me, when I get back home, he says, I'm going to be able to tell him that I experienced real snow. And he says, not only that, he says, there's 4 more inches more than they've ever experienced, because he himself like never experienced this before, like crazy amount of snow, snowing, just pouring down. And to him, it was the most incredible thing in the world. To me, I'm like, ugh, I can't wait until all this melts and goes away.
yeah, and the same is true. We think of like, oh, we go to this island and it's paradise. That's just home for these people.
Yeah.
They see it every day. I was 21 years old when I saw saltwater for the first time. I grew up in Wisconsin. We're far away from
Oh,
saltwater.
okay, okay, all right, that makes sense. My apologies.
And
Yeah, that makes sense.
and I was in Seattle for
Oh,
the national debate tournament my senior year, and we drove past this one park near Puget Sound, and there was the water. And I was like, stop the van, stop the van. And they're like, what? They thought it was an emergency. And I pull out the door and I run out, and I had to taste the water because I needed to prove to myself that it was in fact salty, because I had never experienced salt water before.
wow.
And I've told that story many, many times, and I tell that to people I've met all around the world, and they can't believe that I never saw saltwater because the idea, if you live on an island in the middle of the ocean, being in a landlocked place is so alien to them because that's all they've ever known. And for me, growing up in a landlocked area, salt water in the ocean was completely alien to me. I remember like a few years later, I went to Florida and I saw waves and people surfing for the first time. And I was fixated by that. But again, that's Tuesday if you live on an island.
Yeah, I mean, it's something even you even mentioned here in the US. We all have different experiences as Americans because like I grew up in the Northeast. So I lived near the coast. So I always saw the ocean. I always saw rain and cloudy skies and snow. But there are people that grew up in Florida. There are people that grew up in Utah or Arizona or New Mexico, and they never experienced any of the things that I experienced to a certain degree. Crazy enough that exists literally here in the
There's
United
a
States.
I have a friend who moved to where I live in Wisconsin, and the first week she was here, she would go around driving, taking pictures of barns. I have seen hundreds and hundreds of barns. I could, within 10 minutes right now of where I'm sitting, I could go out and find some wooden red barn that's your typical stereotypical thing that it would look like. I don't even think about it. And I was like, why would you take pictures of barns? She had never seen this before. This was the stereotype image of a barn in a silo of what a farm was supposed to look like. And to me, it was just, okay, I I can show you hundreds of them. But to her, it was a big deal. And that element of familiarity breeding contempt, I think, is something that's true all over the world. People in New York City, there's a lot of native New Yorkers who have never been to the Statue of Liberty.
Yeah.
And if they go to Times Square, the Statue of Liberty, they're only doing so because they have a friend or a relative in town and they need to show them around.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I did live in the city, and I'll be very honest with you. It's a lot more fun outside of the crowded tourist areas. There's a lot of things to do in New York where there's no tourist. And the truth is, when you go to experience a place, like you said, you're creating your own experience. You're going to be there for 2 days or 7 days. It's your time. It's like, why focus on what you can't control when you can focus on what you can control? It's right in front of you. It's yourself.
I get a lot of people that say, "Oh, what's your favorite place? What's your favorite country?" I'm like, you can't really answer that question because your experience anywhere is going to be colored by your experience when you were there. And that can be the rain, it can be the season you're there, and it can be the people you meet. I remember I was in France. I was in line at the Palace of Versailles, and right in front of me was this woman. She was originally from China. She was now a professor in Australia, and we started up a conversation, and we ended up spending several days hanging out together. And I ended up seeing her again when I was in Australia. My time in Paris was influenced by meeting her and the time we spent together. Had that not happened, my view of Paris would be very different. And, I think of places that I've been to multiple times where I had a great time one time I was there. Another time I was there, I didn't have a great time. And it was all due to the circumstances in each trip. It had nothing to do with the place.
Right. It's all about perspective because you tend to forget that your perspective on things really is affected by your mood. Because if you go to a place and you're super happy and you're having a great time and everything's going swell, you don't have that much time to focus on all of the things that are bothering you or the things that you don't like. And then when you go back again, you get a whole different experience depending on the mood, depending on the environment, depending on the people that you're around. It's kind of like rolling dice.
Yeah, I know people that had a horrible experience somewhere. Maybe they got pickpocketed or something happened to them and they say, oh, that country's horrible, I would never go back. And it's like, no, you should go back because, you know, you had bad luck. And that's not the experience most people are necessarily going to have. And you owe it to yourself to have a different experience there, because you can't. A country is simply too big. You know, any country, even the smallest country, is going to be thousands of people.
Yeah. I mean, I remember I went to DR a few weeks ago, and I remember, you know, that there's this stereotype, oh, you go to DR, it's dangerous, you get pickpocketed, yada yada. I went with somebody that's from there. We went to non-tourist areas. I went to all local places. My attitude was, I was there by myself. I was respectful. I did what I had to. You know, I had a good time, but I didn't go down the scary dark alleyway.
You
You
want an
know
experience that will change your attitude on the Dominican Republic?
what?
Fly into Haiti and then cross over to the DR.
Oh, I heard that on the
That is
taxi
one of
car.
the
Yeah.
biggest, most jarring cultural transformations that you'll see is going from Haiti to the Dominican Republic, because Haiti is a profoundly poor country. And right now it's going through all sorts of problems. They have no government, and a lot of bad stuff's happening. When you get over the border, it's a completely different world.
Yeah.
Like, I remember there was this village and they had a baseball diamond, and there were home, and it looked just, not a wealthy place, but it looked like a normal place. And that too influences how I perceive the Dominican Republic. If someone's just coming from a rich country and goes to the Dominican Republic, they can turn their nose up at it. But if you've seen a whole lot of places, then I don't have that view of the Dominican Republic at all, at all. And I think if I've been to a lot of countries in West Africa as well, many of which are profoundly poor, and you can see the difference
And forced
between
slavery is going on in those countries, unfortunately.
where you have like Benin, Togo, or Sierra Leone, and then we go to Ghana. It's like, oh, Ghana kind of has their act together. Senegal has their act together. They're very different than their neighbors, and it's easy to just paint with a broad brush in these places. But when you can actually see the way things work in other places, it gives you a bit more perspective.
The reality I feel is the way that you have change is within community. When you talk about going to these different countries and having one is poorer and one is richer, I think it's all about perspective of the people. When the communities come together and they say, look, we're here in this land, we want to be successful, we want to have businesses, we want to be able to be proud of who we are. It's one thing. I gave DR as a great example. One thing, you meet with Dominican Republic, they're very proud of being Dominican. They're very proud of their country. They're very proud of their family, and that shows in their country. So when you have that mentality built within the community, because that's where things start. It starts from a seed. It starts from the people, and it sprouts out from there. You could you could see that. You could physically see that. It's crazy.
Everybody is proud of where they're from. That's one of the rules I kind of learned. Best example I could think of, I was in Palau, one of the smallest countries in the world. And there again, I was at an internet cafe that was right across the street from Palau High School. And there was this one particular road that all the cars had to go down this road to go over this one bridge. And it was kind of busy. So I was just sitting here waiting for a break in the traffic. And this kid from the high school walks up to me and he goes, "This is how we cross the street in Palau." And he just walks right across the street into the cars. And I kind of follow him because he's, you know, blocking traffic for me. But the simple act of crossing the street was a way to show me and his pride in Palau. It wasn't much, but it was an opportunity to do it.
It was a moment. He had a moment, a good
Yeah.
one. But that is, but that is the thing of being proud of where you come from. Again, stems from community. People always worry about government. That's the topic is always government. Stemming away from that, what about community? When you have somebody that comes from this country, they're proud of who they come from because they're proud of their community. They're proud of the place that they were born to and the place that they were raised in. Whether there were problems that there is, which sometimes you'll talk with these people and they'll tell you the problems that exist in their country that they're not proud of. But I think that's a key marker that shows you something about people, especially where they come from.
Yeah, I think it's universal. I think everybody wants to be proud of where they're from, and I think it's a lesson that a lot of people could learn when they're thinking about things like foreign policy or other things, that you have to look at it through the lens of the people that you're going to be helping or hurting, or what their reaction is going to be. And a lot of times people just ignore that, or they assume like, oh, they'll love us. Not necessarily.
Yeah, and again, there's also a difference of culture. When you have people that are telling other people from a completely different place on how they're supposed to be and how they're supposed to act and who they're supposed to be as people, it doesn't really stem well. It's like me trying to have a conversation that's with somebody that is from a traditional Japanese family and telling him that he can go and have the time of his life in the nightclubs in Korea. He's going to think I'm nuts. I can't do that. I come from a traditional family. We're not allowed to do those things. Why not? Because I don't do that. You you cannot explain something to somebody if they are not even from your own culture and understand where you come from
No,
and why you do those things. Yeah.
I have maintained that culture is actually something that's in your head. We think
Yeah.
that culture is food and dress and music. Those are the trappings of culture. But culture really is something that's internal. And, Japan is a really good example. There are notions of honor that are very profound in Japan that don't necessarily exist in other countries, and family and other things that people just might not understand. And there's a lot of things about Americans that people don't understand for that same reason.
Right. But you're saying it's a mental thing where you can overcome it if you wanted to.
Well, it's I don't know if you ever overcome it. You can There are certain assumptions and kind of a way of seeing the world that you grow up with, that's culture. There are things that you do. I mean, I think that's you can go to an Indian restaurant, you can listen to Indian music. It doesn't make you Indian, and it doesn't make you behave and think like someone from India who grew up in, that system with those set of values. But a lot of times we think that those external things are culture, and that internally that, everyone's all the same, and I don't think that's true. I think there are beliefs and assumptions that people have that can be radically different from place to place.
Right.
And if you don't acknowledge that, that can cause a lot of problems.
Yeah, it can. I also, this is my philosophy. I believe I can respect you, but I don't have to agree with you.
Yeah.
And it's a way of also being able to allow open conversation, because the thing is, if you really want to be able to talk with somebody and be able to understand them person to person, you need to have that type of attitude that comes along with it. Otherwise, you might as well just read a script. Give the person a script while you're at it. Why not?
Yeah. And, a lot of times people come in with an attitude that they know it all, and, their way is the best. And that it seldom works in, building bridges.
Yeah. Let me ask you, you said that right now you've been doing podcasting
Mhm.
and you've been doing educational podcasting. What do you what have you been trying to do in regards to your work?
So I started the show in 2020 when the pandemic hit, and
Right.
everything I had going on in travel just disappeared. Like, just within a period of weeks in March of 2020, like I was on a trip from Portugal, came home February 28th, March 1st, I have COVID for like the first week of March. Everything proceeds to shut down. All the contracts I have going on disappear. 95% of my income dries up. I'm like, well, I need to I need to do something and I can't rely on the travel industry. And I might not be able to rely on them for years. And I had a lot of problems with travel media. One of the problems is people only care about travel before they're about to go on a trip. Travel isn't something you follow like politics, sports, technology, fashion, things like that, that there's
Right.
always something changing. There's something to follow. Travel doesn't follow. The Coliseum, it's there. It's going to be there next year, probably in 100 years. Not much is happening. So, one of the people always ask me, well, why do you travel? The real reason I travel is just to learn. I think it's the absolute best way to learn. And so I thought I could take a lot of the things that I learned, not make a travel show, which I think a lot of people are bored by. Uh, it's not, go to this place and go to this, cafe and whatnot. But you
Dear
just tell
Lord.
the story of a place and the people and things. So I started the show, and every day is something completely different. This week I did a episode on the Taj Mahal. This morning's
Wow.
episode was on the Chinese language. Not a primer about how to speak Chinese or anything, but basically, this is how the language works. This is how it's different from other languages. This is how the writing system works. These are some of the benefits. These are some of the drawbacks of it. These are some of the things that the Chinese government has tried to do to change it. Just kind of a background of like the language at kind of a higher level.
Hmm.
And I've done stuff on history, events in history, people in history, inventions, geography. I even do stuff from science and mathematics, giving the background
Wow.
behind it. And so every day it's just something completely different, and you never know what you're going to get.
Wow. I love that. And again, education is something that you learn over time, but especially with travel, especially with learning from other cultures like language. I love that analogy where Colosseum is going to be around for another 100 years. So you can visit it whenever you want to. But, spending the hour listening about something like that, about what the history of the Taj Mahal or about the Colosseum, how it was built, why it was built. Um, yeah, you're not in a plane, but it's a great experience and you learn something in the process at the same time.
Yeah, I've been shocked at the number of people. The show's done really well. We're getting like 1 million downloads a month,
Nice.
and people all over the world are listening, and people that I never thought I would reach. There are children that listen. I've had 9-year-olds tell me it's their favorite podcast. I got truck drivers
Aww.
that listen, who postal workers, people that go for walks, parents that listen with their kids. It's all over the place. I got teachers that play it in their classroom.
Get out of here. Really?
Yeah, so it's really kind of struck a nerve with I was never planning on that to happen, but it's a pretty wide group of people, and I get these outbreaks that kind of happen in certain places. I had one in Iran where the podcast really took off in Iran, and I've recently had a kind of growth spurt in Kenya.
Nice.
People discover it, and they just binge on it. So the episodes are short, so you can just keep listening, listening, listening.
The really amazing thing is we constantly talk about the new advancements, bettering ourselves. You know, times have changed, but at the same time, there's so many things around us. There's so many things around us that we can learn about and teach us. This is honestly like the reason why I do podcasting. I love bringing on people like you that are able to share experiences. I'm able to learn something out of it. Like, oh my God, that's really cool. I never knew that before. Wow. That's something as human beings we have as the most incredible superpower. That's kind of what makes us kind of like Superman in a way.
And one of the reasons I also did the show is that most of what we are fed online is determined by an algorithm. And they're thinking, oh, well, you like this, so you'll like this because other people like this. And there's no serendipity involved. It may be that there's something way out here that you would like, but it's never going to show it to you because it's not in this other bubble of things that you like. And so the show really is about just randomness and serendipity and introducing you to things that you didn't even know that you didn't know. And I think that's really kind of the only way you can learn and expand yourself. And that's why I did the show.
Yeah, and kind of tying back to what we said, where you can plan as much as you want when you travel. When you get there, might change, might be
Yeah.
completely different.
Yeah. Don't ever plan too much. If you got your schedule mapped out down to the hour, that's probably too much. You got to leave some time in for things to happen, because things will happen. And you want things to happen, because those are always the best parts of the trip.
Yeah, especially I love those experiences, those moments where you meet new people and you start conversing and you have a conversation and you start talking and you start learning like, oh, you do this, oh, you draw that, oh wow, you went to that record shop over there, what was there, oh, that's super cool. And then you leave after that and you're like, wow, that was amazing, that was absolutely amazing. And you just traveled to this place, you just flew to this place and you had this experience because you made the decision to go there. But at the same time, you had this awesome experience you never thought would even happen. And those can happen anywhere. When you travel, when you go out, it's just, I think it's being able to honestly just accept it. You can't control it.
A lot of people are very nervous when they travel. They're very afraid of traveling. They're afraid of the unknown. And that's because we only hear about things on the news that are bad. So if you ask people what their perception of the country of Colombia is, a lot of people will say, oh, it's drug lords and things like that. That was in the 80s, right? That was a long time ago. That's not a thing anymore. But nothing has replaced that in the public consciousness. And so they only know the bad things that happen. So they're always afraid to travel somewhere. And, a good example, when the Boston Marathon bombing happened, there was a friend I know in Los Angeles who was hesitant to travel. And I called her and I said, are you okay? She goes, well, no, what? I go, well, there was a bombing in America. I just wanted to ensure you were all right. And she goes, well, that was in Boston. I go, yeah, but you're in America. That was in America. And of course it was absurd. But the point is, we do that all the time for other countries. Mexico is a really big country. And if something happens in the north of Mexico, people are afraid to go to Cancun. There was an Ebola outbreak in Sierra Leone several years ago, and people were canceling trips to South Africa. Sierra Leone is closer to London than Cape Town. But because it's, quote, Africa, everybody was painting with such a broad brush
I love
that
this.
they were afraid to go to South Africa, which is thousands of miles away, because of something that happened in Sierra Leone. And the further away you get from something, you paint with a broad brush, you don't see the nuance. If there's, if you live in a big enough city, in the course of a month or something, there's a chance someone might get killed, right? Nobody moves, nobody sells their house. It was just some random thing that happened.
Mhm.
There was some domestic violence incident or whatever, or there's a part of town not to go to. And you know that because you live there and you're accustomed to it. But when you hear the same thing happen somewhere else in the world, you develop a sense of fear because you're not familiar with it. And so you're afraid to go there. And that's one of the biggest things I think that keep people back. There was this one woman that was killed in Aruba several years ago.
Mhm.
Aruba is a perfectly fine place. It doesn't have a high murder rate.
No.
Just whatever happened to this woman happened, and it was tragic, but it's not a regular thing. But that's all you heard about Aruba for the longest time. And so I mentioned I was going to Aruba once, and someone said, "Oh, be safe." I'm like, "Why?" It's like, and because they heard this thing on the news, and that's all they knew about it was something bad.
Yeah, I remember I went to the UK a few years ago, like in 2020, and I just remember the amount of people that were saying like, "Oh, be careful." English people, they always drink and they're drunk and they're nasty. Oh, they steal. Oh, you'll get mugged. You're in North England, you can't trust anybody. I went there. I was pissed drunk. I was pissed drunk. I was in a store with my friends. The guy there gave me a bottle of water. He says, "You okay, mate? Have a safe night." And I was like, "Thank you."
You go someplace like the UK, you go to a pub, you order in an American accent, you will start a conversation with someone.
Oh my God, they love it. They love it.
Where are you
Especially
from?
mention
Oh, yeah, yeah. And then they just want us. They just they just love talking about it. And because we speak the same language, you can actually have maybe more of an in-depth conversation than you might in other parts of the world. And
uh,
you'll get talking, shooting the shit about politics or sports or whatever. And yeah, it's always great fun.
it,
Same
ta-
in Ireland.
it takes I'll be honest with you though, it took me a while to get used to the northern accent up there. It's hard to understand them, especially when they talk fast. You're like, whoa, whoa, slow down.
I once got my hair cut in Liverpool, which is not that far north, but the uh, Scouse accent is this guy was very thick. I had no idea what he was talking about. No idea whatsoever to this day. That we had a
God,
conversation, I guess, but I don't know what it was about.
my God, that's crazy. Yeah, and it's kind of bananas because we speak the same language, but at the same time we don't. You mentioned Ireland. Ireland's another great example of like, yeah, they speak English. They don't speak our English. Trust me. Have a conversation with somebody that is from Ireland.
Yeah, it's pubs are a great place to have those kind of experiences. Even in places like Thailand, I've been to some pubs where it was a lot of expats that were there, and
Expats, what are those?
non-Thai people who are working there or living there,
Oh,
but they're not
interesting.
immigrants. No, an expat. Yeah, it's
They just come there and they work there?
yeah.
Oh, okay.
So if you let's say you have a job that takes you to Tokyo or something, and you live in Tokyo, you're not an immigrant. You don't intend to stay there the rest of your life and move your family there. So yeah, an expatriate.
It's a little harsh.
No, that's the term. It's not a
No, I know.
pejorative.
I'm
Yeah.
I'm being comical. But so you were saying you were at this place and you met these people.
Oh, there's lots of them like that. Yeah. Well, you just start up, just it's not just meeting the people in that country, but meeting other travelers as well. So you're meeting people from all over. Sometimes when you travel, if you're staying at a hostel or if you go to a pub or a restaurant or something like that, so you can meet people. I remember when I was in East Timor, I stayed at a guest house, and one of the guys there was from the Democratic Republic of the Congo, and we would stay up having some beers, having a discussion. He worked for the UN. He was a peacekeeper. Very interesting guy. How he got there, and what their mission was. I've had tons of conversations like that. I remember once I was at a hostel in Tokyo, and it was a whole bunch of Europeans, me, and a two-man rap group from Philadelphia that was touring in Japan.
Oh my God.
I would never have had anything in common with these guys. But because we were Americans surrounded by Europeans in Tokyo, we were all of a sudden like, you stay up late and argue about and solve the world's problems and stuff like that. We were kind of like Team America for this one night against all the Europeans.
My
And
God.
the great part about this hostel in Japan is that they had beer and vending machines. So you could just stay up all night long and just get all the beer you wanted.
I love that. And it kind of ties in again with go with the flow. It's so easy to get caught up in this web of fixation. This constant of category and planning, and sometimes you gotta be open and you gotta be able to just let yourself just go I'm serious, just go with the flow. And honestly, just for me, I've tried it countless of years already. I will continue living this way. It really changes your mind and really changes perspective and changes the relationships you make with people.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So, Andy, first off, this is incredible. Thank you so much for coming on. Just hearing about all of these places you've been to and experiences that you've had. And let me ask you something. Where can people that are listening, where can they find you?
Easiest place is wherever you're listening to this podcast right now. You can search for my show, Everything, Everywhere, Daily.
Perfect. So with that, be sure to check out Andy's podcast. And if you want to check out more of Lost in the Groove, you can find us on Facebook, TikTok, Instagram, and YouTube at Lost in the Groove Pod. So with that, we'll catch you in the next one. Stay groovy, my friends. Bye, everybody.